When healing takes place in your life, it is never just about you. It is bigger than the relief you feel in your own body, bigger than the freedom you sense in your own mind, and bigger than the peace that settles into your own heart. Healing is a signal, a demonstration, and a living testimony that what happened to you can happen again in someone else. The beauty of healing is that it is not designed to be a private event hidden away in silence, but rather a transferable experience that has the power to echo beyond the boundaries of your own story. Every time a person steps into healing, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, it becomes evidence that the impossible can be made possible. Evidence is what strengthens faith, and faith is what opens the door for others to experience the very same thing. This is why healing is never supposed to remain locked within the life of one individual. It is meant to be replicated, multiplied, and carried forward. Think for a moment about how deeply people are moved by stories of others overcoming adversity. When you hear that someone who was once paralyzed now walks, when you listen to the voice of someone who was silenced by trauma, now speaking with boldness, or when you witness the peace radiating from a person who once lived in torment, you cannot help but believe on some level that what they carry might touch your own life. That is the transferable nature of healing. It transcends the person and becomes a force that shifts the reality of everyone who encounters it. When someone says, "I have been healed," they are not only making a declaration about their own life, they are opening a door of possibility for anyone who hears them. This transferability is why testimonies matter so much. They are not just casual stories of something good that happened, they are living proof that transformation is available. The human mind is wired to recognize patterns, and when we hear of healing in one life, it builds a subconscious expectation that the same result can be duplicated. This is how healing spreads, not just through direct contact, but through the ripple effect of testimony. One person's breakthrough becomes a seed planted in the soil of another person's faith. Over time, that seed grows, and suddenly, what once seemed unreachable becomes real. Many people suffer in silence, believing that their pain is unique, that their struggle is unsolvable, and that no one else could ever understand what they carry. But when healing is transferred through testimony, it breaks that illusion of isolation. It says to the broken heart, "You are not the only one who has walked this road." It says to the sick body, "Others have stood where you are standing, and healing found them." It says to the weary soul, "There is a way forward because someone else has already walked through the darkness into light." That knowledge alone has the power to ignite faith where despair once lived. When you keep healing to yourself, you limit its reach. But when you release it, when you dare to share it, you set in motion a chain reaction that cannot be stopped. The power lies in understanding that what you have received is not meant to terminate with you. Healing is a current, like electricity. It flows, it transfers, it lights up everything it touches. If you try to contain it, it grows stagnant, but if you release it, it multiplies. This is why people who boldly share their healing stories so often witness others stepping into similar breakthroughs. They have become conduits of replication, channels through which healing continues to spread. The transferable nature of healing is not dependent on status, position, or education. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. Once healing touches you, you carry an authority in that area that no one can argue against. Your story becomes living evidence that cannot be denied. People may challenge theories, they may resist doctrines, but they cannot dispute an experience. When someone looks at you and sees the visible difference between who you were and who you are now, they are confronted with the undeniable truth that healing is real and it can happen again. That confrontation forces a shift in their own thinking, and once their thinking shifts, their life begins to follow. There is also a hidden strength in the idea that healing is transferable. It relieves you from the weight of thinking you must convince others through persuasion alone. You don't need polished words or perfect explanations. All you need is authenticity. All you need is to let your life speak. The transformation in you is already powerful enough to replicate itself in others, because transformation carries its own authority. When you simply reveal where you were, what you experienced, and where you are now, the story itself carries the power to move others into action, into faith, and into expectation for their own healing. This is why so many breakthroughs are birthed in communities where testimonies are freely shared. When one person rises, others feel the pull to rise as well. Healing becomes contagious. It ceases to be an isolated incident and starts to spread like wildfire. One story fuels another, and soon, entire atmospheres are saturated with faith and expectancy. In those atmospheres, healing is no longer the exception, it becomes the standard. And all of it begins with one person who understood that their healing was not just for them, but for every single person who would ever hear their story. When someone shares their testimony, there is a weight to it that no textbook, no lecture, and no argument can ever carry. Words that are born out of lived experience have an undeniable force, and this is why the power of witness shapes belief so deeply. People can reject information, they can debate philosophy, and they can challenge opinions, but when they are confronted with someone standing in front of them who says, "This is what I went through, and this is how I came out of it," something within them shifts. It is no longer theory, it is reality. Testimony bypasses intellectual resistance and touches the heart, because it speaks from the realm of personal truth. Hearing a testimony plants the seed of belief in the soil of the listener's spirit. Belief is not always born out of teaching. Many times, belief is ignited through seeing and hearing evidence. When someone is a witness to your healing story, they encounter proof that what was once impossible has now become possible. Proof changes the landscape of the mind. Doubt begins to loosen its grip because it is no longer sustained by the lie that no one has ever overcome this problem. The listener hears, sees, and sometimes even feels the conviction in your words, and in that moment, belief begins to awaken. It may be fragile at first, like a flicker in the darkness, but that flicker is enough to change everything, because belief does not need to start big, it only needs to exist. Consider how many people struggle under the weight of hopelessness, not because they lack desire for change, but because they lack evidence that change is possible. They have prayed, they have fought, they have cried, but they feel as though nothing ever shifts. When a testimony reaches them, it brings evidence into their situation. Evidence is the fuel of belief. When belief begins to take root, faith is sparked, and faith creates an opening for healing to flow. This is why the voice of someone who has been healed carries such immeasurable power. Their story is not just about themselves. It is a gift that shapes the belief system of others who may not yet have the strength to believe on their own. The human mind is influenced heavily by the power of suggestion and example. If you tell a person they can climb a mountain, but they have never seen anyone do it, they may doubt you. But if you point to someone who has already stood on the summit and returned to tell the story, belief is suddenly within reach. Testimony functions in this way. It validates the possibility of healing by offering a living example. It creates a mirror in which the listener can see themselves, not as they are, but as they could be. The witness does not simply hear the story. They imagine their own breakthrough within it. They begin to internalize the belief that if healing happened for someone else, it can happen for them too. This is why testimonies are such a powerful tool for dismantling the stronghold of unbelief. Unbelief thrives in isolation, convincing people that their situation is unique, that no one else has ever faced such a struggle, and that there is no hope for them. But when a person hears a testimony, that isolation is broken. Suddenly, they realize they are not alone. Someone else has walked a similar road. Someone else has faced a similar battle, and someone else has emerged victorious. That realization plants a seed of courage, and courage gives birth to belief. Belief is not a passive state. It is an active force. When belief takes root, it changes how a person thinks, speaks, and acts. A testimony can be the catalyst for this transformation. For example, a person struggling with sickness may feel trapped in fear and despair, but when they hear the testimony of someone who has overcome the very same illness, they are stirred to believe differently. That shift in belief might lead them to pray with greater expectation, to seek help with renewed determination, or to release bitterness that has been holding them back. In each case, the testimony has acted as the spark that set belief into motion. There is also an unseen dimension to this power. Words spoken from a place of lived experience carry an energy that penetrates deeper than ordinary conversation. When someone shares their testimony with authenticity, their conviction becomes contagious. The listener does not only hear the words, they feel the truth behind them. The passion, the gratitude, the unshakable certainty that healing took place, all of it transfers into the heart of the one listening. This transfer builds belief in ways that logic alone never could. People may forget statistics, they may overlook arguments, but they rarely forget the story of someone who stood in the fire and came out transformed. Witnessing a testimony is also powerful because it dismantles the barriers of comparison. Many times, people believe healing is reserved for the special, the chosen, or the exceptionally strong. They think, that could never be me. But when the testimony comes from an ordinary person, someone they can relate to, those barriers crumble. They begin to see that healing is not about perfection or privilege. It is about possibility. The more relatable the witness, the stronger the belief it creates in the listener, because it communicates that if healing could reach someone like them, it can surely reach anyone. Every testimony is like a key that unlocks belief in another heart. It is proof that reshapes perspectives, evidence that inspires courage, and truth that dismantles lies. When someone becomes a witness to your healing, they are not just hearing your story, they are encountering the possibility of their own story being rewritten. In that encounter, belief rises, and with belief, the door to healing begins to open wider than it ever has before. Expectation is one of the most powerful forces in human experience, and testimonies have a way of lifting expectation to levels where miracles become possible. When someone shares their healing story, the atmosphere changes. It is no longer filled with silence, doubt, or resignation, but with anticipation that something extraordinary could happen again. Expectation works like the soil of the heart. It determines whether the seeds of healing can take root and grow. A testimony tills that soil, removing the hardness of unbelief and watering the ground with hope. Suddenly, what once seemed barren and lifeless begins to stir with the possibility of new life. When people walk into an environment without expectation, they are often weighed down by the heaviness of disappointment. They may have tried before, prayed before, or sought healing before, only to walk away empty-handed. Disappointment has a way of draining expectation until nothing is left but resignation. But when someone rises up and shares what they have gone through, how they were touched, and how they came out the other side, it confronts the resignation head-on. It says to the atmosphere, "Don't settle, don't give up, don't close the door, because healing is still possible." That shift in expectation changes everything, not just for the person telling the story, but for everyone within earshot. Expectation functions like a magnet. It pulls in opportunities, draws in possibilities, and positions people to receive. Without expectation, even the greatest opportunity can be missed, because the heart is not prepared to see it. But with expectation, even the smallest seed can produce extraordinary results. A testimony raises the level of awareness so that people stop looking at what they lack and begin focusing on what could happen. That simple change in focus is often the difference between walking away unchanged and stepping into a moment of transformation. Think of expectation as the climate of the soul. Just as certain climates allow crops to flourish, while others make growth impossible, the climate of expectation determines the outcome of the seeds planted by testimony. When the air is heavy with expectation, faith rises more easily, courage feels more natural, and fear loses its grip. People begin to lean forward rather than shrink back. They listen with greater openness. They respond with greater boldness, and they act with greater determination. All of this is stirred when someone dares to tell their healing story. The testimony becomes the spark that ignites expectation, and expectation creates the environment for healing to replicate itself. There are countless examples of how expectation shifts entire rooms. When someone shares their testimony in a group, suddenly the eyes of the listeners begin to shine differently. You can feel hope waking up. You can sense minds opening and hearts softening. The atmosphere takes on a charge, like static before a storm, where you know something is about to break loose. That atmosphere is not accidental. It is created by the rise of expectation. One story has the power to move a crowd from despair to faith, from hesitation to confidence, from passivity to action. The listener begins to say within themselves, "If it happened for them, maybe it can happen for me." And that, maybe, is the seed of expectation that grows into faith. Expectation also serves to silence doubt. Doubt thrives in the absence of hope, but when expectation is stirred, doubt finds less room to operate. It cannot coexist with a heart that is alive with anticipation. Testimonies carry this ability to chase out doubt by shifting the inner conversation. Instead of thinking, "It will never happen," the listener begins to think, "What if it does?" That subtle shift may seem small, but it is enough to prepare the heart for breakthrough. Expectation removes the walls of resistance and creates a landing place for healing to manifest. Another unique aspect of expectation is that it doesn't just affect the individual. It spreads collectively. One person's expectation can influence an entire group. Just as fear can be contagious, so can hope. When someone boldly declares what has happened to them, their confidence raises the expectation of those around them. Soon, the atmosphere is no longer filled with isolated skepticism, but with collective anticipation. This is why testimonies have such an important role in gatherings. They unify hearts around a shared sense of possibility. That shared expectation creates a momentum that is almost impossible to stop. Expectation also draws people into alignment with the very thing they are believing for. A person who expects healing begins to think differently, speak differently, and act differently. They may lift their head higher, open themselves to new opportunities, or step out with a boldness they did not have before. All of this is triggered by the rise of expectation, which is in turn ignited by testimony. The story of another person's healing becomes the key that unlocks a shift in posture, attitude, and mindset. This shift sets the stage for replication, because healing is most often received by those who are positioned to expect it. Even in the darkest circumstances, expectation can be the light that points the way forward. People can survive incredible challenges if they have something to look forward to, something to believe in, something to anticipate. Testimonies provide that spark. They remind listeners that no matter how hopeless the present may feel, the future can look different. That awareness lifts expectation, and expectation is what keeps the heart alive until the breakthrough comes. When the atmosphere of expectation is created through testimonies, it becomes fertile ground for healing to not only happen, but to multiply. The more testimonies are shared, the higher the expectation rises, and the greater the environment for miracles to take place. Each new story adds fuel to the fire, until the room is ablaze with anticipation, ready for something extraordinary to unfold. Healing does not replicate because of who a person is, how much influence they carry, or how much power they seem to have. Healing replicates because it flows from principles and truths that are greater than any one individual. When a person experiences healing and then shares their testimony, the focus is never meant to be on their personality, their achievements, or their unique abilities. The testimony is powerful because it points to the source that made the healing possible. That source is unchanging, limitless, and available to everyone. When the attention is shifted from the individual to the principle, from the story to the power behind the story, healing is no longer confined to one life, but becomes accessible to all who are willing to believe. Too often, people disqualify themselves from healing because they think it only happens for certain kinds of people: the strong, the holy, the disciplined, or those who seem to have everything figured out. They convince themselves that they are not good enough or not spiritual enough to receive the same miracle. But testimonies dismantle that lie by redirecting attention. A true testimony never says, "Look at me and how special I am." Instead, it says, "Look at what happened, look at what is possible, and understand that it did not come from my strength, but from a higher principle that anyone can align with." In this way, healing is not tied to the personality of the one who received it. It is tied to the universal law of faith and the timeless truth that transformation is available to every willing heart. When a person shares their story, the greatest impact is not in the details of their own journey, but in the way those details illuminate what can happen for others. Testimonies become a mirror in which the listener can see themselves. They might not have the same background, the same struggles, or the same path, but they recognize that the principle at work is not exclusive. The principle that produced healing in one life is the same principle that can reproduce healing in another. This realization shifts the listener's perspective from admiration of the individual to alignment with the source. The power lies not in the person, but in the principle that worked through the person. This is why replication is possible. If healing depended on personality, then it would end with the one who experienced it. But because it depends on principle, it can be repeated endlessly. Think of it like a seed. The seed does not care who plants it, where they come from, or what their past looks like. As long as the conditions are met, the seed grows. Healing functions in the same way. When faith, expectation, and openness are present, healing takes root. Testimonies show others that the conditions are not impossible to meet. They are simple, they are universal, and they are available to all. This understanding empowers people who once thought healing was out of their reach to step into it with confidence. There is also great freedom in knowing that healing is not personality-driven. It means that no one has to strive to become someone else in order to experience breakthrough. They don't have to copy the exact words, the exact behavior, or the exact journey of the one giving the testimony. Instead, they have to recognize the principle underneath and align themselves with it. This prevents testimonies from becoming about imitation and keeps them centered on inspiration. You don't have to become the storyteller. You only need to align with the truth that made their story possible. When people begin to understand this, testimonies no longer intimidate them. Sometimes, hearing someone else's incredible story can actually discourage people who feel unworthy or incapable of experiencing the same. But when it becomes clear that the healing did not come from the individual's greatness, but from the principle they tapped into, the testimony shifts from being a source of comparison to being a source of empowerment. Instead of thinking, "That could never be me," the listener begins to think, "If it happened through that principle for them, it can happen through that principle for me." That change in thinking is the moment replication begins. It is also important to recognize that principles are consistent. They work the same way every time, regardless of who engages with them. Just as gravity does not only work for some people and not for others, the principles of faith, expectation, and healing do not discriminate. They operate consistently. This is why the stories of healing have such power, because they demonstrate that the principle is active and reliable. Testimonies reassure the listener that what worked once will work again, and what worked for one will work for many. When testimonies are shared in this light, they create a shift in culture. People stop idolizing personalities and start focusing on the principle. They stop saying, "If only I were like them," and start saying, "I can align with the same source they aligned with." This creates a ripple effect where healing spreads not through admiration of certain individuals, but through the replication of principles that anyone can live by. In this way, testimonies empower rather than discourage, liberate rather than limit, and expand rather than confine. Healing replication always traces back to the same truth. It is never about the greatness of one person, but about the greatness of the principle that worked in that person's life. When the focus shifts from personality to principle, testimonies become more than stories, they become doorways. Each testimony opens the way for someone else to step through, not by copying the person, but by embracing the principle that made the healing possible. And when people realize that the source is unlimited, they no longer doubt whether there is enough healing for them. They understand that healing is not a rare resource given sparingly, but a flowing stream that anyone can drink from, again and again. A testimony is more than just a personal story. It becomes a map that guides others through terrain they may not understand. When someone has faced sickness, pain, fear, or deep emotional struggle, and then walks into healing, the path they took leaves behind markers for others who are still searching. Those markers may not eliminate the journey, but they give direction, they provide clarity, and they inspire courage. A person lost in a forest may panic if they see no way forward. But if they stumble across footprints, broken branches, or signs that someone has traveled this way before, hope rises within them. They realize they are not wandering in isolation. Someone has gone ahead and made a way. That is what a testimony does. It becomes the evidence that there is a route to follow, that breakthrough is not hidden forever, and that healing is not unreachable. When a person listens to your testimony, they are not just hearing about what happened to you. They are being handed a kind of roadmap. They hear where you started, how broken or hopeless you felt, what decisions you made, what obstacles you faced, and what shifts allowed healing to come. That story lays down stepping stones for them. They may not walk in the exact same order, but your journey shows them it is possible to move from despair to restoration. In their mind, your testimony draws out the shape of a bridge they can begin to cross. This is especially powerful for people who feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of their struggles. Many times, people don't lack the desire for healing. They lack the belief that they know where to start. The darkness of suffering can blind them to possibilities, and they convince themselves there is no way out. A testimony provides light. It shows them the beginning of a pathway and offers reassurance that even if the road looks long, others have traveled it successfully. Your story becomes a lantern to their steps, revealing that forward motion is not only possible, but achievable. Think about how many people stay stuck because they assume their situation is too unique. They believe no one else could possibly understand what they're going through, and because of that belief, they isolate themselves. Testimonies break that illusion. When someone hears a story that echoes their own pain, they recognize that they are not alone in their struggle. Suddenly, they feel a sense of companionship, as if the one sharing their testimony is walking beside them, saying, "I know the way. I've been there." That companionship is powerful because it pushes back against loneliness, and loneliness is often one of the greatest barriers to healing. Your testimony also teaches through example. Many people learn not by being told what to do, but by seeing how others have done it. When you share the process of your healing, even the smallest details can become significant lessons for someone else. Perhaps you mention how you chose to change your thinking, how you held on to faith during the darkest nights, how you surrounded yourself with supportive voices, or how you made a decision to let go of bitterness. Each detail is like a landmark on the map. It helps the listener orient themselves on their own journey and identify practical steps they can take. A testimony can also become a source of courage. when the journey feels too overwhelming. When people hear that someone else endured pain and still came through, they are less likely to quit. They find strength in knowing that the journey may not be easy, but it is survivable. Your endurance becomes their reassurance. They realize that if you could keep moving forward, despite the obstacles, then they too can keep taking one step at a time. The courage drawn from another story is often what keeps people pressing on until they reach their own breakthrough. At times, a testimony can function like a compass. It doesn't always show every detail of the journey, but it gives direction. People may not know every turn they will face, but they gain a sense of which way to go. For example, someone might not understand all the complexities of their illness, but hearing your testimony might guide them to a mindset of hope rather than despair, or toward seeking help rather than hiding in silence. In this way, testimonies realign people with the right direction, pointing them toward healing instead of resignation. Beyond that, testimonies inspire faith by showing that healing does not require perfection. Many people feel disqualified because they believe they have made too many mistakes or that their struggles are too severe for change to ever occur. But when they hear your story, they see that healing did not come because you were flawless. It came because you were willing to believe, to persist, or to open yourself up to change. That realization gives them permission to believe again. Your story becomes the proof that imperfection does not disqualify anyone from transformation. There is also a multiplying effect in testimonies functioning as maps. Once someone finds their own healing by following the markers left by another, they too begin to leave markers for those behind them. They add their story to the growing path, making the way clearer and easier for the next person. Over time, what was once a lonely trail becomes a well-traveled road, filled with guidance, encouragement, and proof at every step. Healing becomes not just a solitary journey, but a collective movement, with each person's testimony extending the map further. This ripple effect is why testimonies carry such significance. They do not just comfort or inspire in the moment. They provide lasting direction for anyone who needs to know that healing is possible. They turn what once felt like an impossible maze into a navigable route. And for the person who feels lost, just knowing there is a path is sometimes enough to give them the courage to start walking toward it. When you share a testimony of healing, it does not stop with the moment it is spoken or with the person who hears it directly. Testimonies carry a ripple effect that goes far beyond what you can see, reaching places and people you may never meet. Words spoken with conviction travel into hearts, and those hearts, once ignited with faith and hope, go on to influence others. A story of healing is never contained. It spreads, it multiplies, and it outlives the one who first told it. One person's breakthrough becomes the seed for countless others, and that seed continues to produce long after the original voice is silent. Every ripple begins with a small disturbance in still water. In the same way, a testimony may seem like a simple story in the beginning, just a few words spoken out of gratitude or courage. But those words disturb the stillness of despair in another person's life. They set in motion waves of possibility that keep expanding outward. You may share your story with one person, and they in turn tell someone else, and that person tells another. Before long, your testimony is no longer just your own. It has become part of the collective encouragement of a community, a reminder to all who hear it that healing is not locked away, but available and real. The ripple effect of testimonies works not only through words, but also through the transformation visible in your life. People watch you. They notice how you walk, how you speak, how you carry yourself after being healed. Even without speaking, your very presence tells a story. That silent testimony reaches into the lives of those who may never sit down to hear your detailed account. They simply observe the change and are stirred by it. They may not even realize at first that what they are witnessing is planting seeds of belief in them. Later, when they face their own battles, they will remember what they saw in you, and the ripple continues. There is also a generational ripple that flows through testimonies. When you speak of what you overcame, your children, grandchildren, and even those who come after them inherit that story as part of their legacy. Your healing becomes a marker in your family line, a point of reference for those who face struggles in the future. They will recall that someone in their lineage walked through pain and came out whole, and that remembrance will give them courage. Testimonies, in this way, extend beyond your lifetime and anchor future generations in faith. What you speak today can empower someone decades from now, long after your voice has faded, because the ripple keeps moving. In communities, testimonies create a culture where healing is normalized rather than treated as an impossible dream. The more people share, the more others believe. Soon, testimonies stack upon testimonies until the atmosphere is saturated with expectation. That collective environment produces even more healings, and each new story becomes another wave in the ripple. The culture shifts, not because of one isolated event, but because of the continuous spreading of testimony. In such an environment, healing multiplies, not by accident, but by the power of repeated evidence. The ripple effect also breaks barriers that people might have placed around themselves. Someone may refuse to listen to a message of hope from a leader, a teacher, or even a family member, but when they hear the testimony of someone who has walked where they are walking, those barriers crumble. They see themselves in the storyteller, and suddenly, the message breaks through. That breakthrough in turn influences their actions, their decisions, and eventually their own testimony, which continues the ripple in new directions. Healing spreads into circles that could never have been reached otherwise, all because one person was willing to share. It is important to recognize that the ripple effect of testimonies is not always immediate. Sometimes the words you speak may rest silently in someone's heart for years before they awaken. You might share your story with someone who seems unmoved at the moment, but later, when they face their own valley, they will remember. In that moment, your testimony will rise again in their memory and give them strength to believe. The ripple may be delayed, but it is never lost. Testimonies have a way of resurfacing when they are most needed, proving that their influence is timeless. There is also a mysterious way in which testimonies reach beyond the speaker's awareness. You might share your story in a small gathering, not realizing that someone in that room will carry your words into places you could never go. Perhaps they tell it to their family, or share it in a workplace, or repeat it to a stranger in need. Without you knowing, your story travels across cities, across nations, even across generations. It is like throwing a stone into the water. The ripples extend far beyond the point of impact, reaching distant shores. That is the beauty of testimonies. Once released, they cannot be contained. As more people hear and share, The ripple grows into a wave that has the power to transform entire communities. What began as your personal healing becomes part of a movement of healing that touches countless others. Your pain, once a private struggle, becomes a public inspiration. Your breakthrough, once personal, becomes communal. The ripple keeps moving outward, carrying with it the hope, the faith, and the evidence that healing is not just possible but repeatable. And as long as your story continues to be told, the ripple will never end.